Hey everyone, I'm Hirsch Tapadia. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Allstacks, and I'm excited to talk to you about the last part of our people, process, and outcomes study on how COVID has affected the state of software development. This time we're going to be focused on outcomes, and I have my fourth and final shirt with squares, and you may see the leg of my dog in the corner. So as he's passed out, let's talk through what we found. So today we're going to talk about how outcomes are affected, and we're going to cover a few different topics. So is the work that we're doing, is it consistent? Is it more volatile? How has it changed? Are we still able to focus on work that we planned on doing? Are we effective in releasing code? How is our actual delivery changing? And then finally, as always, we'll close with what things can you do to support your team? So let's dive in. So we have an interesting concept inside of Allstacks. We track alerts and risks. So this is what we look at as like anomalies to how you typically work. And so in this case, what we've done is we've studied our population set to understand, are stories or issues that you're working on, are they getting stuck in progress? Are they bouncing back to in progress? And how's that different from how it normally goes? And so when we looked across the entire population, what we saw is that as we transitioned to COVID, there was a few things. There was initially a decline in the rate of bounce backs, but that eventually went up as we got later into the work from home cycle. And there was also a corresponding increase in the number of items that got stuck. So right after the transition, when things were really volatile, what we saw was a lot of work on newer items over existing items. It's kind of in this March 2nd through April 6th phase. And then as work shifted back to that backlog, there was a bunch of items that suddenly were getting completed and unstuck. And so there was a lot of indicators of rehashing old work or revisiting old work. Because there's all that time in between, that often created a bounce back. And so, we had to go reinvestigate requirements or rework on old tasks. And so now there's this kind of like harmonic where we're working on newer things, digging deep into the backlog. You're seeing things get stuck, get unstuck, bouncing back. And it'll take a little while for that to settle out as we kind of flush through the backlog. But it's something we've seen pretty consistently over time. When we look at the type of work that we're doing, what's interesting is that pre-COVID, pre-work from home, there was a lot of variability in, are we working on planned work or unplanned work? This is something that we call epic focus or roadmap focus. So what percentage of the items that you're working on are things you had planned to do versus things like maybe an escape defect or an interruption or some one-off feature that showed up. After work from home, we actually saw an increase in focus on planned work, which pretty cool, pretty interesting that, but also logically follows as we have kind of more focus time. We maybe don't have as many like hallway interruptions. We don't have people popping in and stealing time of developers. Folks are able to kind of spend more time focused on their longer arc tasks. And so with that, we're seeing this more consistent focus on planned work pretty much across the board. We've also seen with the work from home, pretty much no change in merging code into the code base. So the remote environment really has had little effect on developers' ability to push code. I think that's an encouraging sign. It maybe seems obvious, but it's important to note that these tooling that we've all invested in, they're helping developers consistently merge code, get that back in, go through the code review processes. And as we saw in the last video, the process video, we're really able to make sure by leaning into these tools that these kind of outcomes stay consistent. And then finally, This is what we called slippage. So you plan to deliver something on a particular date. How late does it go? How early does it go? And what we saw, maybe what you expect, first few weeks of COVID, work from home transition, spikes in slippage. Things are taking longer as people are just settling into their new normal. But then over time, over the next, quarter or so, really those rates have come back to what's been typical for the population. So normal slippage, kind of 5 to 10 days across the board for the population, and we're seeing that pretty consistent now and moving forward. So really what it implies is that most of our population has successfully transitioned to work from home, and they're able to kind of continuously deliver on a normal set of outcomes. As you think about how you're going to support your team going forward, a few things you may want to think about. So one thing we at Allstacks have seen really successful is a no meeting day. So every Wednesday, no meeting, not even stand up, just really focused on all your planned work, get it done. Don't get context switched, don't get interrupted. And so it'll actually generally increase your planned work focus and decrease the interruptions. You'll have better outcomes overall. Also, take this opportunity to reprioritize that backlog and the roadmap. So if you remember, we saw that harmonic of bounce backs, things getting stuck, unsticking them, going back up. This is because we have to revisit things that we hadn't looked at in a while. And so this is a great opportunity to draw a line in the sand and say, well, do we really need to be working on that old stuff? Do we need to revisit it, rebuild it from the ground up, knowing what we know now, and maybe just flush that stuff out of your backlog and just move forward? The other thing is lean into these ceremonies, generate good requirements, try to leverage some strong planning, because if you have to adjust course in a remote friendly world, remote first world, it's not as simple as it used to be, maybe simple in air quotes, because you're not walking into a room, grabbing some people and making a decision. You're actually likely going to schedule a meeting. You got to find it somewhere in the calendar. Maybe it's a day or two out. You show up, you go to the meeting, and then you're making a decision, but the time between when you decided to have the meeting to when you actually do have the meeting, you've basically paused all your work. And so it's a good time for you to lean into these ceremonies and try to create a buffer between cycle adjustments, change management, because it'll give you the opportunity to let things be a little more stable. So just lean into those ceremonies. Finally, we can rerun this study with all new data. We're happy to do that. If you'd like to be included in the study, please just shoot us a note at covidreport@allstacks.com. It's going to be really important to keep an eye on these things, because as we go into kind of this new spike and prolonged work from home period with COVID, we're going to be dealing with all these new outcomes again, as we're back into this phase of uncertainty. We're not sure what's going to be ahead of us. And so it's important to be consistently doubling down on process, supporting your people, so that you can have these good outcomes, because we're not sure when we're going to be back or if we're going to be back. So with that in mind, we'll consider rerunning this study in a few months, depending on how things are going. And if you'd like to be included, again, just shoot us a note, covidreport@allstacks.com.